Hello, everybody. Our next guest is someone who wasn't able to physically join us, but we're immensely privileged that he was able to join us virtually. Oh, yes, he's behind me. Hello, Ed. Wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for making the time.
And thank you for having me and having my giant head looming over you.
You're speaking to us in the middle of the BIOTOPIA Festival, which has been going on for the last 2 days on the topic of senses. And of course, your book, once it came out, was a huge inspiration to us in terms of how we understand senses beyond the human. And just to, how on earth did you have the time to put this together? Can you maybe talk about, and why were the senses such a fascinating topic for you?
I've been actually writing about the ways animals perceive the world for a long time, in drips and drabs throughout my entire career as a science writer. I had the idea of turning this into a book about a year before the COVID pandemic started. So I was well underway and got to take a 4-month break in the middle of the pandemic to finish it, which was a very lovely break from staring into the horrors of everything else. I think that this topic is endlessly fascinating because there's something almost magical about the senses and what they allow us to do. If you think about what the senses are, they detect things like electromagnetic radiation. They detect things like chemicals wafting through the air. None of these are things that we really should obviously be able to detect, right? There's no reason why we should have systems in our heads that allow us to sense bits of electromagnetic radiation, right? It's kind of incredible that we do, and that from that we can derive meaning from the world. I write in the book that the senses are a way of biology taming physics, a way of making sense and meaning from the coursing chaos of the world around us. And I think they're incredible in that regard, just on their own. But I think they're even more incredible when you understand how much they vary from one creature to another. So I'm sitting here in this room, I'm surrounded by plants and window and desk. I'm not sitting here feeling as if there's a hole in my perception, that there's stuff that I'm missing. My brain creates this very compelling illusion that what I detect of the world is complete and full. But that is very much an illusion, and it is one that all creatures share. So if I was in this room with a bat or an elephant or a snake, we would all be experiencing a radically different feeling of the reality around us. We would each only get a very partial understanding of that reality. And I think that's one of the most compelling ideas in all of biology.
Yeah, and I think this is a key concept in the book. You talk about this idea of Umwelt, which was coined by Jacob von Uexküll, and which this idea that, in fact, humans, I find it a great lesson in humility in a way, that humans really only have access to this small bandwidth, so to say, of all of the possible sensory stimuli that we could receive, and in fact, there's a huge amount going on that we're not even aware of, and can you talk a little bit about that? This idea that in a way humans, you could say, are a bit living in a state of sensory deprivation.
Absolutely, and I think that the amazing thing here is that all animals are, right? So I cannot sense the magnetic field of the Earth in the way that a sea turtle could or a songbird could. That sense allows them to navigate and migrate over long distances. I can't sense the electric fields given off by living things in the way that a platypus or a shark can. I can't see the color ultraviolet, and so things like flowers and the feathers of birds look very different to my eyes than they do to pollinating insects or to other birds. I can't hear high-pitched ultrasound like most rodents can or bats can. They use that to navigate. I can't hear infrasound, very low-pitched sounds that elephants and whales use to communicate. So yeah, as you say, I have, like all humans, I have a very partial understanding of the world. But every animal has a partial understanding of the world, right? Like this is the point of the Umwelt concept, so that each creature is special in its own ways and restricted in its own ways, because nothing can sense everything and nothing needs to. Yeah. And I think the corollary of this is that to really get the full picture of what is going on around us, we need to consider the senses and experiences of other creatures.
And I'll come back to the extraordinary world of animal senses in a moment, but some people have said that the experience of the last 2.5 years has restricted the human sensory world yet further, that we've been socially isolated and deprived of touch, contact, and so on through social distancing, and that those of us who have caught the virus, many of us have also lost sense of smell and so on. Do you think that's true, that our sensory world has been further restricted through the pandemic? And is there something that, now that theoretically the pandemic is less dominant, at least, that we should address in some way?
Yes and no. Like, yes, in some of the ways that you've described, but I would argue that there are ways in which the pandemic actually expanded our sensory world. In the early days of the pandemic, especially, a lot of people were saying, like, I can hear a lot more birds than I used to be able to hear. And there were all these memes about nature is healing, this idea that humans were indoors and now animals were flocking into places that humans used to be in. It's not really that. It's just that humans are incredibly noisy. Like, we live in a world full of noise pollution, and that harms the animals that share that world with us, but it also disconnects us from nature. When there's a lot of noise pollution around, we hear less, but we also hear over a much smaller radius. We block out the sounds around us. And when people were quieter, when people were less busy, less out and about, we heard more and over wider ranges. We became more aware then of the nature that exists just in our own backyards, and that we were missing all the time. And I think that actually, in some ways, was a profound gift. I argue this at the end of the book. I sort of don't know how that translates in Germany, but in the US, certainly, wilderness is this concept that is linked to wide, distant, remote spaces, things like Yellowstone National Park or the Grand Canyon. But wilderness exists on our doorstep, in our backyards. We miss it because we don't think about it and we don't perceive it. But when we can, I think that brings us a little bit closer to the natural world.
No, it's amazing you said that, actually, because right here in Biotopia, we, inspired by this sudden silence of the first lockdown, we created a project called Dawn Chorus, which was to inspire people to go out and record birdsong in their gardens or from their balconies during the lockdown, and was exactly recognizing that phenomenon, that suddenly people could hear the natural world more strongly. And I think at the end of the book, you do talk about these issues, about how we're sometimes unwittingly interfering with the sensory Umwelt of animals, and you mentioned noise pollution, which is obviously one key way. We heard earlier today, actually, from Bill Hansen about smell, plastics decaying and producing a similar smell to plankton, and making whales think that they could be good food, and causing huge amount of disruption to their channels of sense. Are there other examples that you can think of how humans are really need to recognize the richness of the animal sensory world and perhaps change our behavior in consequence?
Very, very much so. So light pollution is a huge and big, huge and important issue. Much like noise pollution, we have filled the darkness with light in a way that in a way that waylays, distracts, and harms the animals around us. So migrating birds that can't afford to waste any of the energy they need for a long trek get distracted and put off course by lights at night. Baby sea turtles hatching on a beach will often not make it into the ocean because they're pulled up towards human settlements on a shoreline. Pollinating insects get distracted from the flowers they need to service by street lamps and other artificial lights. There are lots of examples of this, and I think that the consequences are profound and catastrophic. And we don't really think of it that way because we don't think of light as a pollutant. You know, we think of light as something synonymous with safety and knowledge and goodness. Like, we want more light in the world. We want to illuminate our way out of the dark ages. But light at a time when it doesn't belong, and it hasn't belonged at night for, cycles of billions of years, is a problem. And then there are examples, I think, closer to home, where our disregard for other animals, the senses of other animals, has harmful effects. So I have a dog. A lot of people have dogs. And one very common thing I see among dog owners is that when they could take their dogs for a walk, they will yank their dogs along and deprive them of opportunities to smell and explore the world. And I think that's a shame. Dogs exist in a world of smell. Smell is primary for them in the same way that vision is to those of us who can see. And if you're yanking your dog away from what it wants to do, which is often sniff and explore, then you're kind of depriving it of a really important part of its doghood. You know, it'd be as if I was going on a walk with a friend, and every time I stop to look around at the trees or a sunset, that my friend covers my eyes and just drags me across by my neck. And I think that when I walk my dog, I try and give him as much opportunity as possible to sniff and explore. And we go on dedicated smell walks where he gets to set the pace and he gets to do whatever he wants. And usually what he wants is to use his nose. Like, those walks take a long time. We might spend half an hour going around like one block of our neighborhood. And I think that's good for him. I think it allows him to use the sense that he most depends on to understand the world.
It's funny. My family actually in Ireland breed Irish red setter dogs, and they have a strange habit, which is that they find something extremely smelly and they roll in it. Right. But you're saying we should allow them to do this and to just live with it and not wash the dog or not inhibit them from this activity.
So my dog also does that. He really likes earthworms for some reason. Every time he finds an earthworm on the road, he'll roll in it. And sometimes we don't want him to do that. Like, there are limits, right? Like, if my dog tries to sniff another dog's poop, I will pull him away from that. But in the main, we let him explore. I think that it's not just for his benefit. I feel like I benefit too. I think it reminds me of how much I don't sense and how much I'm missing in even the most familiar of surroundings. We walk around on streets that I have walked along thousands of times, and every time it feels like a completely new adventure for him.
And I'm curious, when you're researching the book, was there, you talk about so many different species, but was there any particular species that really you found especially fascinating, or even that you felt a sense of sensory envy that had some sensory power that you would really like to acquire as a human?
There are There are so many. The book is full of riches, and it's really hard to pick a particular one. You know, I would love to be able to echolocate in the water like a dolphin can. Underwater echolocation has even greater powers than it does in the air, like a bat does. It can peer inside living tissue. So a dolphin that's echolocating on a human could probably sense their skeleton. Maybe a fetus inside a pregnant person, shrapnel inside someone who's been in a war. I could, a lot of animals, probably most animals that can see, can sense ultraviolet light, and so can detect patterns and flowers and the world around us that we humans can't sense. Most birds have the ability to sense an entire dimension of colors that we can't perceive. So there are a lot of different examples. I think each of them would be incredible. One of my favorite stories in the book involves a group of insects called leafhoppers. They're very small. That most people don't know them, but if you have been in a park or a garden or really any green space, I guarantee you will have sat next to or walked next to a tree hopper without knowing it, a leaf hopper. These insects vibrate their abdomens while sitting on plants, and they send vibrations moving through the stems and leaves of plants that other leaf hoppers can then sense. These vibrations are not classically sounds. They're not audible to us. Like even if you stick an ear next to the insect, you won't be able to hear them. But you can convert them into audible sounds by clipping a small microphone onto the plant and hooking it up to an amplifier. And when you do this, the sounds that you hear are incredible. They are magical and haunting. They are completely unlike what you would expect an insect to sound like. It's not a simple chirp like a cricket or a cicada. They can sound like bird song or musical instruments or, the sounds of machines or monkeys. They are complex, rich, and bizarre. And the idea that the plants around us are coursing with these vibrational songs that we cannot hear and that are deeply beautiful is, I think, an incredible thing to think about whenever we're in a green space.
It's amazing you should mention that, because by an incredible coincidence, we actually brought along a recording of the vibrational love songs of tree hoppers created by Reginald Coxcraft, who you talk about in the book as well.
Right? And the thing that I love about this is that I've been out with Rex Coxcraft looking for these sounds. He does this in like his backyard, in parks. He will go out with a microphone and an amplifier, and he will listen to this stuff. And we went on one such expedition that I write about in the book. So few people know about this and do the kind of auditory prospecting that Rex does, that there's a really good chance that if you do it, you will hear a sound that no human has ever heard before. And I think that speaks to the wonder and the possibility of animal senses. I write at the introduction of this book this moment where Rex takes one of his mentors out into the jungles of Panama, and he finds some leafhoppers, and he does this. He clips the microphone, and he gives his advisor some headphones, and guy's listening on the headphones, and he's listening to what sound like mooing cows. And then he pulls the headphones off, and now he's in a jungle again. He can hear birds and monkeys. He puts the headphones on, mooing cows. Headphones off, jungle noises. And that's what thinking about the senses of other animals is like. It's an act of travel. It's literally stepping into another world that can exist right next to us and that we might be completely unaware of.
And Ed, is this something that it requires lots of very fancy equipment and is very expensive, or is it something that maybe people even here could go and try and hook up a microphone to a plant in their garden and see what kind of sound world exists there, or vibrational world. Is it something that is easy enough to do?
It's actually shockingly easy. Rex gave me as a present like a little clip-on microphone. The kind that like musicians might use, and guitarists have them all the time. Like, go into any music shop, you'll find one of these things. A little clip-on thing that you might put on like a stringed instrument. You can clip that onto a plant, hook it up to a small amplifier, and off you go. Like, in many ways, technology has massively helped us to understand the senses of other animals. The book is full of people using lasers and infrared cameras and high speed cameras and all the rest. But oftentimes you can use incredibly simple equipment, like this type you can get from any kind of like basic electronics store. You could use that to listen into the electric pulses given off by electric fish, or the vibrational songs of tree hoppers and leaf hoppers. Sometimes, and I think the thing I want to stress here is there are cases in which technology actually doesn't help us, right? Like, birds, I say that birds have access to this huge dimension of colors that we can't see. I can't give myself like 4-dimensional color vision, right? I just can't, because mine works in 3 dimensions. Likewise, most birds have the ability to see behind themselves because their eyes on the side of their head, so they have like wraparound vision. I can't do that, right? Even if I have goggles that project what I see, what's going on behind my head, that would still have to project onto my 2 eyes, which face forward. So there's a lot about animal senses that technology can't give me the experience of. And the only way to get that experience is to make effortful acts of imagination, to take imaginative leaps. And that is sort of our superpower. The ability to step into the sensory worlds of other animals is a deeply and profoundly human thing to be able to do. I consider it a gift, and I think it is one that we should try and cherish and make use of.
Yeah, we actually have downstairs these helmets that allow you to see like a hammerhead shark or a chameleon looking backwards and forwards at the same time. But obviously, as you say, that's only part of the story, the optical experience. But actually, I'm curious, how many people in the room have tried on one of these helmets? Good. Yeah, so about 2/3. Yeah, that's great. But it is an amazing experience to suddenly be able to see your visual field in front and behind of you at the same time. But do you think is this just an exercise in curiosity, or is there like any, what is the real benefit of this imaginative leap that you're talking about, to kind of put ourselves into or to attempt to put ourselves, because as Thomas Nagel says, we can never quite get there, but to try to put ourselves into the shoes of another species, or the eyes of another species. What is the real benefit?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. As we've already said, the failure to do so means that we make choices that harm the animals around us. I think if we do make this effort, we understand the world around us in a new and profound way. Everything from the streets that I walk on with my dog to the plants that I might walk past on a walk through the forest. I understand that the world around me is richer and deeper than it was before. I understand the animals around me in a new way, including those close to me, those that share my home with me. But I think fundamentally, to me, this is about curiosity and empathy. Two of the tent poles that I try and uphold throughout all of my writing. I think the world around us is incredible, and I think we only ever see small parts of it. And through all of my work, I want to show people hidden sides of the reality that we experience. My first book was about the microbes that influence our lives and that are literally too small for us to see. The second book is about the hidden information that other animals can tap into and that we can't. most of my pandemic writing. It was about hidden aspects of the world around us, structural vulnerabilities that make us weak in the face of a new pathogen and that we need to address and remedy if we're to do better against this incoming tide of new diseases. I am interested in showing people what we're missing and what we could understand about the world around us, because I think it's valuable to be able to do that.
No, it's amazing. Our core values for Biotopia are actually curiosity, empathy, and then we have a third one as well, which is agency, to inspire people to feel a sense of personal agency. So you're clearly inspiring us in many ways. I think we have to end up soon, but I just I couldn't help noticing that I think yesterday you announced that you're going on a sabbatical, and I felt a feeling of, oh no, who are we going to look to now? Who's our guide for the next stage of what we're going through with the pandemic and with other issues? But we understand, of course, that it's good to take a break from time to time. But I mean, we are an institution which is about science communication and finding new ways to inspire people around the living world, biology, and how humans connect with the living world around us. And we've obviously seen a lot of changes in the science communication landscape during the pandemic, and new people becoming stars of science communication on the one hand, and then on the other hand, a huge amount of fragmentation. If you're going off on your sabbatical, and I hope you're going somewhere nice and relaxing, but what would be your wish for what will happen in the next year in terms of science communication? What would you like to see happen by some of those who you've inspired along the way?
This is a really good question. I think that the pandemic has made ever clearer to me that science is a social enterprise and cannot be separated from the rest of society. I think one big mistake that we have made throughout the COVID pandemic is treating it purely as a scientific or health issue, when it is in fact a profoundly social issue. It capitalizes on and widens vulnerabilities in our society. It shows you where safety nets are weak. A lot of these issues are not purely scientific ones, right? Like, so just understanding the basic biology of a virus, or like the epidemiological fate of a spreading infection, doesn't tell you everything that you need to know in order to do better at controlling these kinds of problems. I think in all of my writing about the pandemic, I've tried to make clear that it is a social problem as well as a biomedical one. I think my hope is that this entire field, whether you want to call it science communication or journalism, grapples with that idea. And I hope that we also direct our attention towards the communities of people who need it the most. I have spent a lot of the last year writing specifically about immunocompromised people, long haulers, and people with complex chronic illnesses, people who've lost their loved ones to COVID, healthcare workers who've burnt out. I think that we need to direct our attention to the people who have been most harmed and most left behind in all of this. And I would hope that more people tell those kinds of stories over the next 6 months while I'm stepping back.
Great. Well, it's been really a pleasure. I would love to talk all day about chameleon eyes and pain of lobsters and mantis shrimps, but sadly our time is out. And really great to have you with us virtually, and hope someday you will make it to Munich to visit Biotopia in person. And meanwhile, wishing you all the best for a relaxing sabbatical. And thank you. Great to speak with you.
Thank you.